Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This is where we take some, well, sometimes complex ideas and try to make them really practical for everyday life.
That's the aim.
And today, we're really getting foundational. We're diving into human consciousness itself using some fantastic source material that looks closely at, you know, the structure and the ego.
And crucially, the path to presence. It's surprisingly direct, actually.
That's what struck me. So for you listening, think of this as your mission, if you like. We want to go beyond just talking about mindfulness.
Right. We want to actually dissect the engine, you could say, of our inner conflicts.
We're zooming in on why we react emotionally, sometimes quite intensely.
Yeah. Looking at the ego's architecture, which can be quite deceptive.
And offering some really practical ways to tell the difference between, that voice in your head, the thinking self.
And what you truly are, which is consciousness. At its core, we're tackling this very deep human habit. Splitting ourselves in two, creating this internal division.
Okay, let's really unpack that because I think everyone feels this. Have you ever noticed that? That feeling inside, that turmoil, where your mind just seems absolutely determined to worry or resist what's happening or just complain.
Yeah.
Even when all you want, desperately sometimes, is just a bit of peace and quiet inside.
Absolutely. You're craving stillness, but the mind's running its own show.
It's like having this inner critic or maybe an editor whose main job seems to be finding fault with reality, like right now.
Exactly. And that feeling, that turmoil, it isn't really caused by external events, not directly.
That's the key insight, isn't it?
It arises precisely because we're stuck in this, well, frankly, dysfunctional relationship, not with someone else primarily.
But with ourselves, or rather an idea of ourselves.
Exactly. With the mental image we hold of who we are, we've fundamentally mistaken that constant stream of thoughts, judgments, stories, the inner commentary.
We think that's us.
We think that's who we fundamentally are. And this deep dive today, it's really about offering a kind of blueprint, a way to get the clarity needed to rise above that split, that fundamental mistake.
So to get to the root of this split, the sources we looked at bring up the myth of Narcissus. Now, we usually think of Narcissus as just, vanity, someone obsessed with their looks.
Right, that's the surface level understanding.
But the psychological insight here goes much, much deeper, doesn't it? It points right to how the human ego first arises. Can you walk us through that connection?
Yeah, Narcissus is actually a perfect symbol for this whole process. The core of the myth isn't just looking in the water, it's falling in love with a reflection, something that isn't actually real.
Okay.
For the human mind, this represents that critical moment where duality is born. It's the creation of a conceptual self, a mental image of me.
So there's the real I, the awareness, the being.
The consciousness itself, yes. And then there's this constructed thing, me, the self. That's the mental construct, the identity we build up, the story we tell ourselves about who we are.
The sources really emphasize how strange this is when you stop and think about it.
Oh.
We create this image, who I was yesterday, who I think I should be, how others see me.
All mental concepts.
And then we somehow enter into a relationship with this image. Why do we even do that? And why is that relationship always, it seems, problematic?
Well, it's problematic because fundamentally, you are not two separate entities. You're one. There's only the I.
The consciousness.
Yes. The entire structure of the ego, this false self, it's built entirely on this illusion of separation.
Yeah.
And this mental image, this me, it becomes incredibly demanding.
How so?
It needs constant attention. It needs validation from others. It needs defending when it feels criticized. It needs constant improvement to match some ideal. It becomes the sole basis for how we judge ourselves.
So that's where self-esteem issues come from. And the need for praise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the chronic worry about how we measure up. That image dictates our emotional state moment to moment, based entirely on how well the reflection seems to be doing in the world.
It sounds completely exhausting. Just maintaining that construct must take up so much energy.
It does, and we can see the contrast so clearly if we just look at other life forms, like animals.
Right. The sources mention this. Observing animals gives us clarity.
Think about a dog or a cat. They lead what the material calls relatively unproblematic lives in this specific sense. They don't wrestle with self-esteem.
A dog doesn't look in a puddle and worry if it's, failing at being a good Labrador or if its career chasing squirrels is fulfilling enough.
Precisely. It just is. It's fully present in its being. It's operating, as the sources put it, below thought.
Meaning it hasn't developed that complex layer of conceptual thinking that allows us humans to create this separate mental self-image.
Exactly. Animals are rooted in pure being, moment to moment, largely unburdened by that conceptual self. Now, for us humans, the path isn't backwards. We can't just become below thought again.
That's not the goal.
No. The potential, the destiny, really, of human consciousness is to recognize this duality we've created.
And then rise above it, above conceptual thought.
To a higher state of awareness, yes, where thought is a tool, not the master, and not the source of identity.
Okay, but here's where I think people listening might get tripped up. If they try to stop thinking or rise above it, they worry they'll just, space out or forget important things like paying the rent. How can rising above thought actually make us better at functioning in the world, not worse?
That's a really common and understandable confusion. Rising above thought doesn't mean becoming some kind of mindless zombie. It's not about eliminating thought entirely.
It's about the identification.
Precisely. The identification dissolves. When you manage to rise above that dualistic structure, that relationship you have with the mental image of yourself,
Yeah.
it simply ceases. It loses its power.
So you don't have to consciously try to love yourself or fix yourself anymore.
No, because the entity that felt it needed, loving or fixing that mental construct, is seen for what it is, an illusion. You simply are. You are the consciousness observing the thoughts. The mental image loses its emotional charge.
So, okay, the mind still works. We still need to plan things like this deep dive or manage our finances, write emails. That activity remains.
Of course, it's a necessary tool.
But the crucial shift is that the thinking no longer carries that heavy self-referential weight. It's not about me anymore.
Correct. The ego, that sense of a separate, needy self, is no longer derived from the content of your thoughts, nor is it invested in them. Thinking just becomes a practical tool.
And when you take out all the emotional drama, the self-judgment, the need to be right,
Thinking becomes incredibly functional. It gets clearer, sharper, highly effective. The sources call it just fine. It stops being this prison of repetitive loops and starts being a useful mechanism.
which brings us to that interesting paradox mentioned in the material. You actually become a much better thinker when you learn how to stop thinking occasionally.
Exactly. That pause, that ability to disidentify, it injects clarity because the thought process isn't constantly burdened by the ego's desperate need to survive or to be right or to defend itself.
When you operate from that space of presence, thought is just used when it's needed.
And it tends to be laser focused. You're no longer generating, tens of thousands of anxious, self-referential thoughts every day that are actually completely purposeless and just drain your energy.
And that non-egoic functional thinking
Yeah.
that becomes the foundation for something else the sources talk about, true creative power, which seems linked to manifestation.
Yeah, that's a natural flow. Once the ego's noise quiets down, other possibilities emerge.
So the material we looked at suggests something quite profound, almost like a destiny for humanity, shifting into a state of consciousness where our current struggles, and especially that constant feeling of neediness,
That sense of lack.
it just won't be necessary anymore. And this new state fundamentally changes how we interact with the world, how we affect external reality.
Well, the core problem with our usual state is that egoic barrier we just discussed. The ego is fundamentally built on a feeling of lack. It always feels incomplete.
So it needs something external.
Always. It needs external reality. Maybe it's fame, wealth, a perfect relationship, some future achievement. It needs these things to satisfy it, to complete its sense of self, to finally provide that elusive feeling of happiness.
But anything created from that place of need
Is inherently flawed. It's built on a shaky foundation. Even if you get what the ego wants, the satisfaction is temporary because the underlying sense of lack hasn't been addressed. It's seeking outwards what can only be found inwards.
Now, the moment we start talking about affecting reality through our inner state, through consciousness, we inevitably bump into spiritual or religious language. And the sources are really insistent here on clarifying two words that get incredibly confused: belief and faith. What's the vital difference?
Oh, this is absolutely critical. And yeah, the sources spend significant time on it because much of conventional religion, for example, often emphasizes mental belief.
Believing in a particular story or a doctrine or maybe an historical event.
Right. But belief, by its very nature, is purely mental. It's conceptual. And crucially, the very fact that you need to believe something indicates that you don't actually know it through direct experience.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe there's a microphone in front of me right now. I know it. I can see it, touch it. Belief only comes in when direct knowing is absent, right?
Exactly. To believe something implies you don't know for sure if it's true, Or you can't verify it directly experientially. You're believing in a story someone told you or a concept you've accepted.
The second you have that direct experiential knowing.
Belief becomes redundant, unnecessary.
Okay, so that's belief, mental, conceptual, based on uncertainty. Contrast that with faith. The sources argue faith isn't mental at all.
Not in the slightest. Faith isn't a thought you hold. It's rooted firmly in being. It's a deep, profound sense of trust, a certainty, a feeling of connectedness.
Where does it come from?
It arises when you connect with what the sources call the deep I. That's the essence of who you are, beyond the personality, beyond the mental noise. It's your connection to the very source of all life. Faith is an energetic state, not a mental position.
So if belief is like mentally asserting something might be true, faith is more like an unconditional trust in the way things are, in the flow of life itself.
Yes, it's a state that recognizes this enormous, vast power within you, a power far greater than the small, struggling person the ego believes itself to be.
And sensing that power, that consciousness flowing from the source.
That's what removes fear, fundamentally. When fear dissolves, what's left is this complete, unwavering trust. That state, that's what some ancient texts like the New Testament are really pointing towards in those parables.
That's the mustard seed one.
Exactly. If you have faith even as small as a mustard seed, it's not about mentally believing really hard. It's about tapping into the power of being, which transcends the limitations of the conceptual mind.
Okay, this completely flips the script on how many people think about manifestation, doesn't it? It's not about sitting there wishing really hard for a new car because you feel lack.
That's the classic egoic trap, trying to manifest from lack. The real teaching, the deeper one, isn't about desiring something you don't have. It's about realizing or feeling that you already have the essence of what you seek.
Meaning, the fullness of life is available right now.
Yes. When you connect to that deep I, that inner source, the foundational realization dawns. You don't actually need anything external anymore to be complete, because you already are complete at the core of your being.
But okay, let's get practical. This is where a listener might really struggle. They might be thinking, look, I'm trying to manifest a job because I genuinely need to pay my rent. How could I possibly feel full and complete when my external circumstances are shouting lack at me?
And that struggle itself is the ego at work. It's making the outcome, the job, the money, the absolute prerequisite for feeling okay, for feeling fulfilled.
So trying to create or manifest from that desperate place of egoic need, seeking happiness in the future, needing validation.
Even if you succeed externally, even if you get the job, the sources are clear. You will ultimately fail to find lasting satisfaction. Why? Because the successful outcome will immediately trigger a new need or a new fear, perhaps the fear of losing the job. The underlying pattern of lack remains untouched.
This is where that brilliant analogy comes in, the one about the cream and the skimmed milk. Can you explain that?
Yes, it's very illustrative. Consciousness itself, that feeling of fullness and connection you find in the deep I, that is the cream.
Rich, sustaining, available right now.
Exactly. Now, the external achievements, the job, the money, the relationship, the manifested goal, those are like the skimmed milk.
Meaning?
They might look like the goal. They're the external form, an echo of the inner power you tapped into, perhaps, but they contain almost none of the essential nourishment. They lack the richness of the cream.
So even if I get the job, the money, the perfect partner,
Yeah.
if I haven't first found that inner fullness, that cream,
The skimmed milk of the external achievement won't actually make you any happier or more fulfilled than you were the moment before you got it. Not in any lasting way. It becomes secondary, almost like a game you can play, but played from a position of inner wealth, not inner poverty.
which explains why the teaching is so insistent. Find the fulfillment first. Find that connection with the deep I now.
Yes, that has to be the priority. Only then can action flow effortlessly, authentically. And paradoxically, things often start to come to you much more easily when that desperate, grasping energy of the ego isn't driving the show. The moment you stop needing the outcome to define your sense of self, often the outcome itself begins to shift.
Okay, so we've looked at the ego structure, its illusion, and how it fails to manifest lasting happiness because it operates from lack. Now let's bring this down to earth, into perhaps the most intense and revealing area of life for most of us, our relationships.
Ah, yes, the crucible.
The sources we reviewed really highlight relationships as the ultimate revealer of the ego's patterns, don't they?
They really are, because when we first meet someone, we usually only interact with their surface level. You know, the social mask, the persona they present at work, or in casual settings.
We don't see the deeper stuff yet.
We don't know their deep conditioning, their ingrained patterns, maybe traumas, or what the sources call their subpersonalities. These are like hidden aspects, often remnants of their unconscious past, maybe from childhood.
And these only really emerge under pressure.
Usually, yes. The pressure of shared life, living together, making commitments, facing stress together, that's when the masks tend to slip.
And that's often the moment of shock in a relationship, isn't it? That initial wonderful flow of love seems to vanish, and suddenly there's turmoil, fights, misunderstandings,
And you find yourself thinking, who is this person? I didn't sign up for this.
leading to that very common, almost contemporary thought, I must have made a terrible mistake. I need to get out and find someone else, someone without these flaws.
Which, as the sources dryly note, is partly why so many relationships today are relatively short-lived. People often flee at the first sign of real discomfort, the first emergence of those hidden patterns.
Instead of seeing it as an opportunity.
Exactly. They don't give themselves or the relationship the chance to use that turmoil as an accelerant for consciousness, which it absolutely can be, provided there's at least a willingness, a minimum level of consciousness in both partners to look at what's arising.
Now, one of the main ways this inner turmoil shows up, whether we're in a relationship or just dealing with life on our own, is worry. It's like this constant background hum for so many people. How do the sources help us distinguish between useless worry and, say, necessary planning or problem solving?
That's a key distinction. Worry, as the sources define it, is basically thought activity that's being fueled and amplified by the emotion of anxiety.
So thought and emotion get fused together.
Yes, into this persistent state of fear about what might happen in the future. And the tricky thing about worry is that it pretends to be useful.
How so?
The mind tells you, I need to think about this. I need to work it out. I have to consider every possible negative outcome so I can be prepared.
But is that really preparation? Or is it just spinning wheels?
Mostly it's just spinning wheels. The mind isn't actually solving anything. It's just creating endless negative scenarios, playing the what-if game over and over.
It just ramps up the stress and anxiety, does it?
Exactly. It's entirely purposeless in terms of actually changing the situation. And recognizing that purposelessness, seeing worry for what it is, that's a huge breakthrough for many people.
Why is it so hard to stop then, if it's useless?
Because the worrying process itself develops its own momentum. It almost becomes addictive. It wants to survive. The mind finds a strange kind of comfort in the familiar groove of anxiety.
So just seeing the futility, seeing that this mental churning serves no real purpose other than keeping that self-referential drama alive, that's the first big step.
It's a massive step towards freedom from it. You stop feeding it with your belief and attention.
This leads us to something really counterintuitive at the heart of the ego. If the ego says it wants peace, happiness, things to go smoothly, why is it seemingly so addicted to unhappiness, to resistance, complaining, finding fault?
Because, paradoxically, unhappiness is an absolutely essential component of the false self-structure. The ego might say, I want peace, I wish things were different, but if you observe it closely, it's actions, it's energy. It doesn't really want peace.
It wants conflicts.
It needs resistance. It thrives on having an enemy, whether that's a person, a situation, or just a thought. It needs the fight. It needs to be able to maintain its narrative of being wronged or misunderstood or somehow superior to whatever's happening.
And every time the ego successfully complains about something,
It gets a little jolt of energy. It feels validated. It feels a little bit bigger, as the sources say, because it has successfully defined itself against something external. It solidifies its identity maybe as the victim or the righteous one, or the only one who sees things clearly.
wow, that's a really difficult pattern to spot in oneself, isn't it? Because it means admitting you're somehow invested in your own suffering.
It's perhaps the most challenging aspect to face. And the sources give this incredibly potent anecdote to illustrate just how deep this identification with suffering can go. It involved a woman who was exploring her persistent inner turmoil.
The one about her husband.
Yes. Her turmoil primarily manifested as constant irritation towards her husband.
Not huge things, necessarily.
No, often tiny things. The way he ate his food, the way he held his fork, maybe the sound he made when breathing. Literally anything could become grist for the mill of her internal complaint factory.
Okay.
So she was guided to simply observe that her suffering wasn't actually caused by her husband's actions themselves.
But by her reaction, her mental interpretation.
Precisely. By her mental interpretation of his actions and the subsequent emotional reaction that arose from that interpretation, that was the actual source of her pain.
So the suggestion was simply, To let go of the interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
To allow him to eat however he eats without layering her judgment and resistance onto it.
Exactly. Just allow the reality of the moment without the mental commentary.
In her response.
Her immediate and incredibly revealing response was, oh, but if I let go of that, meaning the judgment, the irritation, what have I got left?
Wow.
And then she added, you would have to let go of myself.
Goodness. That's chillingly clear, isn't it?
It perfectly encapsulates the egoic dilemma. Her entire sense of self, her identity in that context was completely bound up with the suffering, the judgment, the narrative of being annoyed.
The self she knew was that pattern of complaint and resistance.
Yes. Without the unhappiness, without the judgments, without the resistance, she genuinely felt there would be nothing left of her identity in that situation. The turmoil was the ego for her in that moment.
That realization that we can be identified with our own unhappiness changes everything, especially how we look at the challenges life inevitably throws our way. It really forces us to internalize what I think is one of the most powerful perspective-shifting phrases in the source material.
Which one is that?
The world isn't here to make you happy. The world is here to awaken you.
Ah, yes. That one lands powerfully, doesn't it? It completely reframes our entire experience.
How so?
Well, before we have some conscious awareness, before awakening really begins, when a challenge pops up, a difficult person at work, a missed flight, a sudden illness, an accident.
Our default reaction is usually resistance.
Exactly. An immediate mental and emotional reaction against it. We resist the isness of what's happening. We fight reality.
And that resistance is what creates the suffering.
That resistance creates the inner suffering, yes. And that suffering then feeds and validates the unhappy self, the victim identity we talked about.
Right. You complain to your friends, you rant internally, you search for someone or something to blame, and in doing so, you reinforce your position as the one who's been wronged, the righteous defender of how things should have been.
Precisely. But after the beginnings of awakening, when you start to see these patterns, the exact same challenge starts to serve a completely different purpose.
It becomes fuel.
It actually accelerates your awakening because you start to see the absolute futility of resisting what is, and gradually you simply stop doing it as much.
So there's no longer that complaining entity inside automatically aligning itself against the situation.
Less and less. You start to align yourself with the isness of now, whatever form the present moment happens to be taking. The external challenge might still be difficult, objectively speaking.
Like the flight is still missed, the person is still annoying.
Yes, the external facts remain. But internally, the situation loses its power to generate unhappiness because that core mechanism of resistance has been surrendered, or at least weakened.
Okay, but this is often where people hit another snag, right? They recognize, okay, I'm resisting, I'm generating negative thoughts and emotions, and their immediate instinct is to try and fight it, to use willpower.
The ultimate ego tool. I must stop feeling this. I must suppress these thoughts.
And the source material is emphatic. That approach backfires. Willpower doesn't work here. If I tell myself, stop worrying,
You've just created another thought. And worse, you're still identified with the me who is trying to control or fight the worry. You've just added another layer of conflict.
you can't really tell a thought go away, can you?
Yeah.
And you certainly can't just suppress an emotion through mental force.
No. The material uses that really illuminating example of some Western students approaching Zen meditation maybe decades ago. They often came at it with enormous willpower.
Trying to force the mind into silence, sitting there for hours, gritting their teeth, fighting the internal noise.
Yes, trying to achieve a state of peace by sheer force of will. The analogy used is brilliant. It's like putting a lid on a boiling kettle and holding it down with all your might.
You're just suppressing the pressure.
Exactly. You're using immense force to contain the natural pressure of the unconscious mind and emotions. And the danger, the sources observed, was that when these students finally stopped meditating, or when life inevitably applied some pressure,
They exploded.
they were often more unconscious, more volatile, more easily triggered than people who hadn't even tried to meditate. Because all that suppressed energy just erupted. The resistance hadn't been dissolved, it had just been temporarily contained.
So the aim isn't to fight the mental or emotional turmoil. It's more about shifting attention, redirecting focus.
Precisely. When the ego is screaming about the past or catastrophizing about the future, how do you find a practical foothold in the present moment without engaging in that futile fight against the resistance?
You need an anchor.
You need an anchor because when the turmoil is really intense, just telling yourself, be present, often doesn't cut it. The momentum of the mind-emotion system is just too strong.
So what's the most reliable anchor, according to the sources?
The simplest, closest, and most reliable anchor we always have is the breath.
And we're not talking about fancy pranayama techniques here.
Not necessarily. It's about simple, direct awareness. The breath is always happening. Right now, as you listen, it's happening to you. It's proof that life is flowing through you.
So you just notice it.
You consciously bring your attention to the felt sensation of the breath, the inflow of air, the outflow, maybe the rise and fall of your chest or abdomen, the subtle feeling of air passing through your nostrils. Just feeling it.
And what does that do?
It immediately diverts attention and therefore energy away from the ego's frantic mental activity and its emotional charge. You anchor yourself in a physical, present moment reality that is happening now beneath the level of thought.
It's a subtle but powerful act of disidentification then.
Yeah.
You become the observer of the breath.
Yes. And the mind might still try to pull you back into the worry story or the complaint narrative.
And you just gently bring the attention back.
Again and again, without judgment, just back to the anchor. The breath grounds you immediately in the non-conceptual isness of this moment, the now. So, if the ego thrives on resistance and conflict, the ultimate, most fundamental conflict, it creates the pattern that keeps most people locked in a state of underlying dissatisfaction, is what the sources call a very deep-seated pattern.
Which is?
Making the present moment into your enemy.
Wow, that sounds pretty dramatic, making the present moment an enemy. But I guess it shows up in really common, everyday ways. Can you give an example?
Absolutely. It's that chronic feeling of underlying discontent. It's subtle, often unconscious. It's the feeling that you always want to be somewhere else mentally.
Like you're sitting at dinner, but your mind is already on what you'll watch on TV later.
Or you're stuck in traffic, desperately wishing you were already at your destination. Or maybe you're doing some task, any task, and you're just rushing through it, wanting to get to the end of the activity, to the outcome, rather than being present with the process itself.
The sources actually define stress using this exact dynamic, don't they?
Yes, stress is defined quite brilliantly as the gap between now and later.
Where later is just a mental idea.
Purely a mental projection, a future that doesn't exist yet. So you are physically here in this present moment, but your mental energy, your attention, is consumed by wanting to be in that non-existent later.
In that gap, that internal split between where you are and where your mind wants to be. That creates the tension, the anxiety, the feeling of needing to rush.
That is the stress. The mind is literally refusing to inhabit the body's actual location in space and time. It's fighting the reality of now.
And, okay, maybe sometimes it's not quite an outright enemy. Maybe you don't actively hate the present moment.
Yeah.
But there's a more subtle version of this dysfunction too, right?
Yes, and perhaps even more pervasive. Even if the now isn't seen as an enemy, it's often reduced to being merely a means to an end.
Just a stepping stone.
Exactly, just something you have to get through to reach the next moment or the moment after the goal is achieved.
So unconsciously, we operate as if the next moment, the future, is inherently better, more desirable, more important than this one.
That's the underlying, usually unconscious belief. We treat the hours spent working or driving or even just waiting in line as an obstacle, something to be endured or overcome to get to the good part, which is always later.
But hang on, we established earlier that real fulfillment, the cream, can only be found in the deep I, which exists only now.
Precisely.
So if we spend our whole lives treating every single present moment, the only place fulfillment actually resides as just an obstacle to get past.
We are literally guaranteeing that fulfillment is perpetually postponed. It always remains a projection into the future.
A future which, by definition, never actually arrives as the future.
Never, because when that future moment does arrive, guess what? It instantly becomes this moment, the now. And what does the conditioned mind do?
It immediately leaps ahead again, projecting its desire onto the next future moment.
Continuing the exact same cycle of discontent and non-presence, this is fundamentally why striving, even when externally successful, ultimately fails to deliver lasting peace or joy if it's driven by this pattern.
So, just becoming aware that we do this, that we constantly reduce the present moment to a means to an end, that awareness itself is incredibly powerful.
It's the accelerant the sources talk about. Simply becoming aware of this specific, deeply ingrained mind pattern, the habit of rejecting now, or reducing it to a stepping stone, and then consciously beginning to cease the operation of that pattern.
That would speed up awakening.
It would quickly accelerate your awakening, yes, because it's a fundamental shift in your entire relationship with reality, with life itself.
But again, this loops back to observation. It requires a degree of self-observation that, frankly, most people just don't practice routinely.
That's true.
Without deliberately pausing sometimes and looking inward at how your mind is operating, you would even realize that you're living your entire life treating the only time there is now as some kind of inconvenience to be hurried through.
Exactly. And that pattern, like most egoic patterns, operates and maintains its power only in the darkness of unconsciousness. The moment you shine the light of awareness on it,
The leg of observation.
that's the beginning of freedom from the pattern. The moment you actually see yourself doing it in real time, the pattern starts to lose its grip. And in that space of seeing, you have a choice. You can choose to align with the simple isness of the now. Even if the now seems difficult or boring or unpleasant, you stop fighting it. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful, really getting into the nuts and bolts of how suffering is generated and how presence offers a way out. Let's just quickly recap those core takeaways for everyone listening.
Good idea.
First, remember that foundational insight. The ego isn't really you, it's that narcissus-like split, mistaking a mental image for true consciousness.
And true power, which the sources call faith, isn't a mental belief. It's that immediate sense of fullness you can find in the deep I, right here, right now.
That's the cream. True fulfillment is found within now. All the external stuff, achievements, goals, they're secondary. They're the skimmed milk. They can't deliver the real nourishment.
And the path to freedom really is about disidentifying, learning to step back from that worried, complaining, resisting false sense of self.
Spotting its patterns, like making the now into an enemy or a means to an end.
Exactly. And if there's one provocative thought, one practice maybe, to carry forward from our deep dive today, let it be this.
Okay.
The very next time you feel a flicker of irritation or face a challenge or just feel that familiar discontent, just pause for a second and observe with as much neutrality as you can muster. Ask yourself honestly, am I making this present moment into an enemy? Am I resisting it, trying to escape it, reducing it to just a barrier to get past to some better
Yeah.
future? Or can I, just for this moment, align with the simple, unconditional isness of what is? Can I allow this moment to be exactly as it is without my mental label or resistance?
That single observation, that subtle shifted attention, holds the key, doesn't it? It can accelerate everything.
It really can.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for the deep dive today. We really hope this has offered some valuable clarity. Maybe take a moment right now, wherever you are.
Just feel your breath.
Yes. Anchor yourself in that simple, available reality. Feel the inflow, the outflow, and try to carry a little bit of that presence with you into your day. We'll see you next time.